I heard the door swing open before I could finish straightening up the kitchen. Mrs. Collins, my mother-in-law, walked in like it was her house. Her eyes swept the room and stopped on the towel in my hand. She curled her lip, not waiting for me to say hello. "Looks like the help is busy," she said loud enough for Jack to hear. I froze. 1 second, 2. The words cut straight through me, cold and sharp like the stone countertop under my hand. Jack stood behind her. He laughed. Quiet, but I heard it. A quick sound, like he didn't want to challenge her at all. I didn't look at him. If I did, I was afraid I'd see something worse than that laugh. I kept my voice steady. "You're earlier than I expected." Mrs. Collins walked closer to the counter, pulled out a chair, and sat down like she was inspecting my work. The light above her cast hard shadows across her face. "I come whenever I want." She folded her arms. "This house needs someone to keep it in order. And clearly, that someone isn't my son." Jack leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets, eyes avoiding mine. He'd been doing that a lot lately, pulling back, keeping his distance, not even brushing my shoulder when he walked past. Small things on their own, but together they made it hard to breathe. I looked at the towel in my hand and set it down. "I'm making dinner. If you want to talk, you can wait in the living room." She shot me a look. "I don't need anyone telling me what to do." Her voice was dry and cold. Then she turned to Jack. "See? She's always like this." Jack didn't answer. He just smiled again, shorter this time, but it cut deeper. I felt my ribs tighten. Not because his mother was picking at me, but because he wouldn't defend me, not even with a glance. I stepped out of the kitchen to grab more bowls. When I opened the cabinet, I saw the spice box had been moved. My 3 jars were replaced with the brand she liked. The fridge had her groceries, too. This wasn't the first time. I remembered organizing everything a few days ago, but this morning I noticed the cabinet door was cracked open and didn't think much of it. I thought I forgot to close it. Now I wasn't so sure. When I came back to the kitchen, she was looking around. Her eyes moved over every corner like she was taking inventory of what belonged to her. "When did you get a key to my house?" I asked directly. She shrugged. "I'm Jack's mother. My son gave it to me. I need to come and go when I have things to do." Jack avoided my eyes again. He scratched the side of his neck, the habit he fell into whenever he wanted out of a conversation he didn't want to take sides in. "Why are you making this a big deal?" she said. "If you cleaned better, I wouldn't have to come in so often." I tilted my head, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not the help." She raised a brow. "Well, someone has to act like one." My chest tightened, not because of what she said, because Jack said nothing. He just turned, opened a cabinet, and grabbed a bottle of water like we weren't even there. I looked at his back, straight, cold. The way he moved made me feel like I was standing outside my own home. I turned back to the pot of soup boiling on the stove. Steam rose and blurred my vision for a moment. I placed a hand on my belly, an instinct. No one knew about this yet. I'd planned to tell Jack last week, but every time he walked into the kitchen, the air between us was so cold I couldn't find the words. I wasn't hiding it. I just wasn't sure this was a safe moment to open up. From the living room, I heard Mrs. Collins say something to Jack. Her voice lowered, but not enough for me to miss it. "She doesn't know her place." Jack answered with a weak sigh. Not agreement, not disagreement, just acceptance. A long silence followed. I stirred the soup, trying to keep my hand from shaking. Lately, everything felt a little off. Jack came home later, talked less, stood at the window for minutes at a time without explaining why. Some nights he slept on the couch because he said it felt easier. I thought he was stressed from work. But now I wasn't sure that was true. When I set dinner on the table, I placed 3 plates. Mrs. Collins looked at me like I'd broken some ritual. "You should know how to set a table," she said. I looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since she walked in. I know how to live in my own house. Jack set his water glass down harder than usual. Laura, come on, he said, his voice low but clearly annoyed. The glass hit the table with a flat, sharp sound, like something inside me cracked with it. The house used to feel warm and spacious, but tonight it pulled tight around me, like I was standing in the wrong place inside a home I'd helped buy, fix, and keep together. As we sat down, I felt something shifting quietly between us. Not a fight, not a sudden blow-up, a slow process, silent, cold, like someone was moving each thing out of place, waiting for me to realize I didn't belong here anymore. I looked at Jack. The dim light softened his face, creating a distance I couldn't close with a question or an explanation. He didn't look at me, not once. I put my hand under the table, resting it on my belly. My hand was warm, but my body felt cold. In that moment, I knew something was shifting in a direction I didn't want to face, and I knew I was being pushed toward the edge of the doorway, not with words, with silence. After that dinner, the house felt covered in a thin layer of fog, cold and hard to grasp. I washed the dishes, listening to Jack's footsteps and his mother's at the end of the hallway. They spoke quietly, but the house was so still that sometimes even a breath carried. Everything stays in the family, Mrs. Ear, Collins said, no longer trying to lower her voice. I get it, Jack answered, quiet but without the slightest pushback. No one takes your assets, she went on. Not now, not ever. I froze, my hand still under the running water. The meaning of her words hit me like cold water pouring over my wrist. What assets? And why was she talking about someone taking them in my own house? I didn't step closer. I just stood there, listening to the creak of the wooden floor as they moved toward the living room. When I finally turned back to the sink, water had spilled onto the counter. I hadn't noticed I left the faucet running too long. The rest of the evening passed in silence. Jack sat on the couch, eyes glued to his phone. I asked if he wanted tea. He shook his head without looking up. A small reaction, but enough to show how wide the gap between us had become. The next morning, when I checked our joint account to pay the electric bill, I saw the balance had dropped sharply. 3 withdrawals in 1 week, all made by Jack. I stared at the screen, feeling like someone had shoved me out of a place I thought was safe. I didn't want to doubt my husband, but money doesn't lie. I waited until evening. When Jack walked into the kitchen to get some water, I spoke softly. Did you make those withdrawals? There were a few large ones I didn't know about. Jack stopped, but only for a second. He opened the cabinet and grabbed a glass. I needed to. I told you already. You never told me, I said. You sure about that? He turned to look at me, a hint of irritation in his eyes. You forget things. It wasn't a big knife, but a small, sharp one, and it cut into my trust. I didn't forget this, I said slowly. I just want to know why. Laura, he cut in, letting out a breath. Don't blow things out of proportion. Neither of us said anything after that. He walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing in a space that used to feel familiar, but now felt foreign, like I was in the wrong place and no one wanted to say it out loud. The next day, I cleaned my office. The desk drawer was slightly open. Inside, some important papers were shuffled around. I didn't remember leaving them out of order. The tax folder had been moved too. Nothing was missing, but everything felt off. Small changes, but together, they felt like an intrusion. That evening, when Jack got home, I tried asking, Did you go through my office this morning? Why would I go through your stuff? He shot back, his tone a little sharp. I was just asking. Because a few things. Laura, you really need to stop questioning everything. He narrowed his eyes. It's exhausting. I stood still. It wasn't just exhausting for him. It made me feel like I was being cast as the problem, even though I only wanted to understand what was happening in my own home. One small thing cracked the air between us even more. I asked Jack if he could help me carry a bag to the garage. He looked at me, then turned away. "You can do it yourself," he said, his voice flat. "I'm tired," I replied. "You're always saying that." I looked at him. The way he said always made me feel small, like my presence was a burden. Like I had to prove I deserved even the smallest bit of help. "I just wanted you to help with one thing," I said, trying to stay calm. "And I just want some peace." He stressed the word peace, then walked straight into the bedroom. I stood in the hallway, my hand still on the bag's handle. A brief moment, but enough for me to understand he wasn't on my side anymore. It wasn't just arguing. It wasn't just being tired. It was a growing disrespect. I set the bag down and leaned against the wall. My eyes went to the ceiling without really seeing it. I felt my place in this marriage shifting, being pushed out toward the edges, like a new map had been drawn, and I was no longer at the center of it. In the days that followed, Jack came home later than usual. He said work was busy, but when he walked in, he didn't come near me like he used to. He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't put a hand on my back. Things that once came as naturally as breathing, now they didn't. One evening, as I stepped into the hallway, I heard him on the phone. I stopped when I heard him say, "Of course we have to get everything ready first. We can't let things get messy." He paused for a few seconds, then added, "Just do what Mom said." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but that didn't sound like work. It sounded like a plan I wasn't part of. When I walked into the living room, Jack ended the call immediately. He didn't look at me. He just asked, "Do you need something?" I shook my head. "What were you talking about?" "Work stuff." Didn't sound like work. Jack turned, giving me a half smile that held no warmth. "Laura, you really need to stop picking everything apart." That made me quiet for a few seconds. Then I said, "I'm not picking things apart. I'm trying to understand." He shrugged. "There are things you don't need to understand." For the first time, I felt a distance so clear it almost had shape. A distance he created on purpose. That night, lying alone in our bedroom, I placed my hand on my belly. A small movement made me breathe deeper, not because of the baby, but because of a fear born from a thought I didn't want to admit. Jack was preparing something that didn't include me. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew I was no longer safe in my own marriage. And for the first time, the idea that he might be planning a divorce felt more real than a passing intuition. After that night, after lying in bed with the feeling that Jack was preparing something without me in it, I knew I needed space to breathe. The next morning, I went to my prenatal appointment. I sat in the waiting room with my hand resting lightly on my belly. Soft light from the window made the room look calmer than the thoughts spinning in my head. When the doctor told me the baby was completely healthy, the heartbeat strong and steady, I felt warmth rise in my throat. A brief sense of relief, so quick it barely touched me. But right after came a heavier fear. What if the baby grows up in this toxic environment? What if Jack's behavior isn't just stress, but a plan? I came home with the ultrasound photo tucked in my pocket. From the doorway, I heard Mrs. Collins' voice coming from the living room. I stopped, not trying to eavesdrop, but her words cut straight through me. "The baby needs a more stable family, Jack. You know what I mean." I clenched the paper in my hand. Every word was chosen to hit exactly where I was weakest. I stepped back, trying to steady my breath. She didn't know I'd heard. Jack didn't either. But that sentence wasn't random. It had intent. I walked inside as if I hadn't heard anything. Jack looked at me for a second, then turned away. Mrs. Collins gave a thin smile. "I thought you'd gone out for something," she said, her tone light. "I had an appointment," I replied. "Hope you didn't overdo it," she added. Some people don't handle pressure well. I didn't respond. I just felt my chest tighten. That afternoon, when I went into my office to grab some documents, I noticed a folder on the desk, one I hadn't put there. When I opened it, I found a copy of the house papers. Someone had marked my name in blue ink under the section labeled Dependent. I sat down. The ground under me felt like it shifted. Who did this? And since when? I remembered clearly that when we bought the house, my name was on it as a co-owner. Jack had said he wanted us to share everything. The irony stung. Now someone was trying to rewrite the facts in a different direction. I opened the desk drawer. Inside was a small USB drive. I hadn't put it there. When I plugged it into my computer, I found 3 audio files, each only a few minutes long. I clicked on one. My voice came through, fragmented, harsh, and wrong. I can't take this. You never listen. I'm losing my mind. I recognized every line. They were from arguments Jack and I had had, but the recording wasn't the original. It was edited, cut, and rearranged to keep only the moments where I sounded out of control. The quiet parts were removed, the calm parts gone, leaving only the tension. A cold, hollow feeling spread through me. Not because I'd been recorded, but because the clips were edited to look like evidence. Evidence that I was emotionally unstable. I shut the computer, but my breathing stayed uneven. Every cell in my body recognized this wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't impulsive. It was a step in a sequence, a structure, a plan. I walked out of my office. In the kitchen, Jack was rinsing a glass. He turned when he heard me. "Is this USB yours?" I asked directly. His eyes flickered, then went back to normal, too fast. "What USB?" "The one in my desk." "With the recordings." He turned away, opening a cabinet. "I don't know what you're talking about." I stepped closer. "Jack, has anyone been in my office besides you and your mother?" "You're starting again," he said, sounding tired. "Laura, sometimes you imagine things." I bit down hard on my lip. "Imagine? Those recordings are real, and they're edited." He didn't turn around. "I don't have time for this." His avoidance told me exactly what I needed to know. There was something he didn't want to face. Behind him, I heard Mrs. Collins' heels on the floor. "What's going on in here?" she asked, her voice barely hiding her satisfaction at the tension in the room. I looked straight at her. "Do you know about those recordings?" She raised an eyebrow slightly. "What recordings?" "The files in my office." She gave a small smile. "Maybe you should rest. Pregnant women get sensitive." My hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from realizing how confident she was. The kind of confidence people have when they think they're winning. Jack stepped aside, like he wanted the conversation to end. "You're blowing everything out of proportion," he said. "No one is against you." "Really?" I asked, my voice quiet but sharp. "What about the house papers? Since when am I listed as a dependent?" Both of them, Jack and his mother, froze for a beat. A short silence, heavy as stone. Mrs. Collins was the one who broke it. "That's a family matter. You don't need to worry about it." "Our family?" I repeated. "I'm not family." She didn't answer. The thin smile on her face was enough. I looked at Jack. "Do you have anything to say?" He touched his neck, his habit whenever he felt cornered. "Some things need to be rearranged. You don't understand everything." "Then explain it." "Not right now." I saw it clearly. It wasn't that he couldn't explain. He didn't want to. In that moment, the whole picture came together. They wanted to strip me of legal standing. They wanted me to look unstable. They wanted the baby to belong to them, not to me. All of it done quietly, precisely step by step. Before I had time to react, I swallowed the tightness in my throat. The shock was gone. What settled in was a cold clarity running down my spine. I turned away. Mrs. Collins called after me. her voice calm enough to be chilling. A child needs a stable environment, Laura. You should think about that. I didn't answer. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I placed my hand on my belly, not for comfort, but to remind myself I wasn't just protecting me. I was protecting this baby. I picked up my phone. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. In the screen's warm reflection, I saw my face, tired, but not weak. I dialed. When the lawyer answered on the other end, I said only one thing. I need to meet with you as soon as possible. The meeting with the lawyer took place the next morning. I sat in his office under a cold white light, reflecting off the metal table. When Mr. Taylor, the man I'd called the night before, opened my file, I felt like I was about to see the real version of a marriage I thought I understood. He flipped to the first page. I've reviewed your documents and the recent changes. There's something we need to address right away. I heard my heart beat. Jack doesn't have much in assets. What he does have is debt. I sat up straighter. He never said anything about debt. People rarely talk about what they're most afraid of losing, he said, his voice steady. And the most valuable asset in this marriage is actually yours. He slid a copy of the financial report toward me. My name was listed under an account I hadn't touched since before the marriage, the small inheritance from my adoptive parents, an investment that had grown over the years. I'd never bragged about it. I kept it separate, not wanting it to become a measuring stick in our marriage. Why would Jack? I stopped. The question answered itself. The lawyer looked at me, making sure I understood. Your husband's family is building a case to classify you as a dependent. If they succeed, you lose legal standing. And if they file for divorce first, they can use that to fight for custody. Every piece fell into place. The withdrawals, the edited house documents, the manipulated audio files, his mother's words, the baby needs a more stable family. But the part that hurt most wasn't the schemes. It was Jack's laugh in the kitchen when his mother called me the help. A small laugh, but full of agreement. It was the laugh of someone who believed he stood above me, or needed to believe it. And now I realized something else. It was also the laugh of fear. Fear of his financial truth coming out. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing leverage in a divorce. Mr. Taylor tilted his head. Laura, you need to understand this clearly. They've planned a path, but you still have many ways to protect yourself before they take their next step. I looked at the ultrasound in my pocket. I'm not just protecting myself. He nodded gently. I understand. When I stepped out of his office, the air wasn't cold, but the breeze on my skin felt like a wake-up call. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel pushed to the edges. I felt myself walking out of a shadow someone else had built around me without asking my permission. I came home that afternoon. The house was so quiet I could hear the lock turning as I opened the door. No smell of food, no TV, just an empty space waiting for me to face two people who had started treating me like an obstacle. Jack and his mother were in the living room. They looked up when I walked in. Jack's eyes didn't hide anything this time, a mix of caution and confusion. Mrs. Collins kept that overly confident expression, the kind people wear when they think they hold all the cards. I closed the door and stood tall. We need to talk. Finally, Mrs. Collins said, setting her teacup down. I looked straight at Jack. You want a divorce? Jack flinched, but he didn't deny it. I think we need to reevaluate a lot of things. Why not just say it? I asked. Why build layers of secrecy behind my back? Jack drew in a breath. You don't understand the financial side of things. And when you're stressed? I let out a small, dry laugh. You edited recordings to make me look unstable. Jack's eyes dropped. Mrs. Collins cut in. Are you blaming others because you can't control your emotions? I turned to her. I heard your conversation. Everything stays in the family. Don't let anyone take your assets. You two planned this. She raised her brows, unfazed. We're protecting Jack. By stripping my rights? By rewriting the house documents? Jack looked at her, waiting for her to speak for him. That hurt more than anything said out loud. I took a slow breath. You know your assets aren't much. You know you wouldn't keep everything in a divorce. And you assumed I didn't know anything, didn't you? You assumed I had nothing. Jack's fist tightened. No, I cut him off. You were afraid I had more. And the truth is, I do. The room went silent. For the first time, I saw Mrs. Collins lose that mask of calm superiority. The biggest asset in this marriage, I said, my voice sharp but steady, is mine, not his, not yours. Their breathing hitched, just a little, but enough. Jack opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. You thought, I continued, that if you turned me into a dependent, you could keep everything in a divorce. You just needed me to look weaker, less stable. Mrs. Collins shot to her feet. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said. You want the baby. You want the story written your way, where I'm just the outsider who wandered into your son's life. She stepped closer. A child needs stability. I agree, I said, just not the way you define it. Jack moved one step forward, as if to intervene, but didn't dare take another. Laura, I never meant to hurt you. You're doing more than that, I said, calm in a way that surprised even me. You're trying to erase me. The room fell into silence. No one touched anyone. No one pretended anymore. I opened my bag and took out a large white envelope. I set it on the table in front of them. This is the legal paperwork I filed this morning, I said. I'm protecting my assets, and I'm protecting the baby. Jack looked at the envelope as if it were something he'd never seen before. Mrs. Collins narrowed her eyes, her lips tightening. I didn't need their agreement. I didn't need their understanding. I just said one last thing, clear and firm. From now on, I'm not the one at a disadvantage anymore. I turned and walked out of the living room. The door closed behind me with a sound quiet enough not to be anger, but firm enough to mark a new boundary, a boundary they were no longer allowed to cross. After I set the legal envelope on the table and walked out of the living room, the house fell into a silence stretched tight as a wire. I heard Jack call after me, but not in the voice he used to use when he wanted me to stay. This time his voice shook a little, like someone who'd just seen the ground he'd stood on for years start to collapse. Laura, wait. I turned halfway. Jack stood there, his face drained, his eyes wide as if he'd just lost something he never expected to lose. Since when did you have a lawyer? Since I realized I had to protect myself, I said, my voice strangely calm. He swallowed. You don't have to do this. We can talk. You had plenty of chances to talk. That sentence shut him down completely. Mrs. Collins stepped forward, placing a hand on her son's shoulder as if pulling him behind her. Jack, don't let her manipulate you. I looked at her hand on his shoulder. It was the hand of someone used to giving orders, not comfort. Jack shifted a little, but he didn't pull away, and that was the moment she started to lose control. You think you've won? She said, her voice sharper than before. You don't understand my son. You don't understand this family. I know what you were about to call me, I cut in, but I'm not standing in that place anymore. She exhaled hard, ready to keep attacking, but Jack turned to her. Mom, that's enough. Just 2 words, but it was clear. She wasn't used to being stopped. She wasn't used to being challenged, and she wasn't sure anymore that she controlled the board. I didn't stay to watch them argue. I went upstairs, packed a few clothes, the documents I needed, my toiletry bag, and the ultrasound photo I kept in the drawer. When I came downstairs with my bags, Jack stood at the bottom of the staircase. He looked at me like he was trying to find something to hold on to, but his feet were rooted to the floor, unable to move even half a step toward me. Laura, come home. This doesn't have to be so tense. I paused for a beat. Jack, this is still my home, but it's not a safe place anymore. He closed his eyes, like the sentence hit a part of him he didn't want touched. Why didn't you say something earlier? I shook my head. I did. You just didn't hear me. I walked out the door, not running away, but walking in a straight line for the first time in months after being pushed into corners I never chose. I stayed temporarily at a close friend's place, a space warmer and calmer than anything I had left behind in that other house. The small room I slept in that night wasn't fancy, wasn't big, but for the first time in a long while, I breathed without feeling like I needed permission. I lay on my side, one hand on my belly. In just a few quiet seconds, I felt a small movement, soft, faint, but unmistakable. The baby kicked once, like a tiny reminder. I'm still here. I'm still strong. You can keep going. A tear fell onto the pillow, not from despair, from someone who'd held herself together for too long and finally let go. The next day, my lawyer called. Your documents have been filed. You're in a strong position, Laura. Don't be afraid. I wasn't afraid. I was hurting, but the hurt wasn't my enemy anymore. It felt like sore muscles after a workout, uncomfortable, but proof of rebuilding. Jack left a few messages. No apology, no truth, just vague lines. You misunderstood. We can talk again. I didn't want things to turn out like this. I read them, but I didn't reply. Mrs. Collins called too. A short call. You think you can win something here? I said quietly. I don't need to win. I just need to leave the place that's been trying to suffocate me. She hung up immediately. I sat on the small sofa, afternoon light shining through the curtains. I listened to the quiet. It didn't smell like control. There was no disappointed sigh from someone wishing I fit the mold they made. No half smile when someone called me the help. No footsteps sneaking things out of place to remind me I didn't belong. I understood something clearly. I still hurt, but I was standing. I set my hand on my belly again, another tiny movement, soft, like touching the edge of a door just opening. Hope isn't loud. It's just a small heartbeat against your palm. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to teach Mrs. Collins a lesson. Leaving the toxic environment was already my victory. A simple victory. A quiet one. But the first win I'd claimed for myself, not for the version of me they tried to shape. When I opened my eyes, I knew what I would say at the end of this journey. Not to Jack, not to Mrs. Collins, but to myself and anyone who's ever been diminished. My worth isn't defined by what they call me, but by how I rise when they think I'll bow. I looked toward the window. The golden light on the wall felt like a small congratulations. And I wondered, have you ever discovered your strength in the moment you felt the weakest? In that moment, I knew my story had closed. Not with hurt, but with a new door opening for me and the baby.